All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back again today with somebody I've been excited all week to talk with. He is a retired professor of social epidemiology, Richard Wilkinson. How you doing?
Hello, thank you. Nice to be here.
He was so grateful to come by and tell us about his work studying. Namely, what interested me was inequality.
Right, yes. I suppose I spent longer than almost anyone else on the planet studying inequality. And really, I've been thinking about rather little else since the early 1970s. So, or mid-1970s, maybe.
Wow. Well, let's get into it. Obviously, you've done this for a long time. We're a world-renowned expert on inequality. What are some differences between developed countries and their inequality and undeveloped?
Well, much less than you might expect. There was a bit of research which interviewed which interviewed poor people in both rich and poor countries. And of course, being poor meant quite different things in a poor country from what it means in a rich country. So, some poor people in places like India and Pakistan would be living in shanty towns without water and sewerage. And a poor person in Norway would probably be living in a 2 or 3 bedroom flat with central heating and a lot of the modern electronics. And yet they found exactly the same feeling of being devalued, looked down on, regarded as inferior, shame, embarrassment, anxiety, all those things. To do really, I think, with being the bottom of the social ladder, being seen as inferior to other people, being seen as a failure. That was the common thread. Even though the objective living standards were so different. The big difference, despite those similarities, is, of course, that in poorer countries, economic growth still matters, whereas in rich countries, everyone goes on wanting more and more, but it doesn't make any difference to happiness. Basically, where many people haven't got basic necessities, it is important to have higher material living standards. But for us, in the rich world, having more and more of everything makes less and less difference.
We hit a level, and then we plateau, and then that's it.
Yeah, and exactly. If you look at graphs of happiness or life satisfaction, over the last, 50 years or so, it goes up and then levels off. And so some countries in the rich world are almost twice as rich as others, and yet their happiness or life satisfaction is no better.
Mm. So it really does beg the question, especially in the developed world, how rich people can continue to need even more than that.
Yes, I'm about to start writing on that. I've been reading a lot about early human societies, hunters and gatherers, and the early agriculturalists. And it looks as if they didn't have that characteristic. They didn't want to possess more and more. The goods they had seemed to be simply the means of making gifts. People were much more concerned with their social relations, and they dealt with, rather as monkeys maintain the sort of social cohesion of their group by grooming each other. We do it, or did it in those societies, by giving each other things. And the social cement in amongst human beings is still a matter of the little kindnesses we do each other all the time, which creates those social bonds.
Get scoring points with each other in that way. Yeah. I read something funny the other day that said if one monkey took all the bananas from the rest of the monkeys and just let them starve, a scientist would be struggling to find out what's wrong with this monkey. Why is he so greedy? But in the case of humans, we put him on the cover of Forbes magazine.
Yes. True. That's good.
So we're seeing the social issues that are coming up as a byproduct of inequality, like we we're just saying. So what, in your opinion, are some universal metrics of happiness?
Well, I haven't studied happiness itself, but I have read studies by people who have. And a very important part of it seems to be the quality of social relationships. People are happier if they have lots of friends, if they're involved in community life, if they feel valued. And you can actually see it if you measure stress hormones, you find that people who have friends involved in community life and so on, they're more relaxed. And of course, one of the things I think, all most enjoy is times when we're sitting around the group of friends, just laughing and joking. That's close to the happiest we get, I think.
It's a shame that they sell us the idea of connectivity, but with a lot of things, the capitalistic society keeps us isolated, but we're all longing for that connectivity.
Yes. And it's remarkable in a sense that what the studies show are the keys to happiness are so different from what feeds into consumerism, which people imagine drives happiness. And apparently people who study these things say that, you buy some extravagant new bit of clothing or something and your happiness goes up briefly, that after a few days it's back down where it was before.
It sounds a lot like drug abuse.
Yeah, I suspect it is.
And there's probably, based on early pseudoscience, that somehow this was or at least in the Edward Bernays kind of study of propaganda and PR, that this was the best way to keep people kind of in line or something. And so this is why it has become so, pervasive.
Well, it's about status competition. And that's why we go on consuming, because we judge each other's worth and position in society by how much stuff they've got. And that's why the rich go on the cover of, I can't remember what magazine you say.
Yeah, Forbes. Yeah.
Forbes, right.
Right. Yeah. Well, this is what they called conspicuous consumption, which, another pointless thing I don't really understand. But I guess you're right in the sense that this has always been a primitive instinct to want to find the pecking order in a certain sense. So the competition is there, but the way we're doing it has changed.
Well, from what I've been reading recently, the pecking order only becomes important when there is a pecking order. But in the hunting and gathering societies, the ones of which the vast majority were highly egalitarian, where there isn't a pecking order, then you're no longer bothered by that kind of thing. And if people start being a bit uppity and taking on airs or bossing people around or pretending to be better than other people, apparently they start to mock them and laugh at them. And if they go on like that, they're ostracized.
Wow.
And anthropologists say that equality in those early societies was maintained by what they call counter-dominant strategies, i.e. ways of taking people down a peg. I remember thinking that maybe there was some of that left where we all used to enjoy the scandals about the royal family and that Charles who's become king and all the idiotic things he said and so on. We're enjoying that scandal because in a way it's we're saying, look, you're no better than the rest of us, really.
Yeah. I enjoy this. And I'm saddened that we've let the balance get so out of whack where we have lots of sycophants and things like this, people who are gladly licking the boots of authority while forgetting to watch out for friends, neighbors, family.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting, really. So knowing that the status quo is making us completely sick and miserable, how do we circumvent the madness of industrialized capitalist society and try to find that, rediscover our equality?
Well, I think you're right. We've got to do it. I think we've got to do it not only for the sort of reasons to do with happiness and well-being that we've been discussing, but also because to deal with climate change, the climate crisis, we've got to have greater equality. And as we said earlier, what fuels endless consumption is inequality and hierarchy and so on, emulation of the people above us, feeling inferior if there are richer people, all that kind of thing. That the consumerism that goes with inequality has been demonstrated repeatedly in different studies. If you live in a more unequal area, you're more likely to spend your money on status goods, on fashion clothing, on smart cars and all that kind of thing. Initially, they showed this simply by looking to see what people searched for on Google, and you can get all the search terms people use, and you find they're searching for all this luxury stuff. But then they actually started looking and seeing what sort of cars people drove and so on, and finding, if you do live in a more unequal place, then you're more worried about all these issues. Inequality makes money and status and class more important. So it's harder to get away from all that kind of stuff.
That's a shame.
In a way, it's because, inequality ranks us all. From the way we feel it and see it, it's as if the best people were at the top and the worst people at the bottom, and we're very worried about how other people see us. And you can see there are studies now of what psychologists call status anxiety, your worries about how you're seen and judged, which show that all income groups feel more status anxiety when they're in a more unequal society. And in a more equal society, everyone has lower status anxiety. We're a bit more at ease with each other. And I think what gets in the way of social relationships is our insecurity, about other people's judgments of us. You start feeling lack of confidence, low self-esteem, particularly, I think, girls and young kids in their late teens, terribly concerned about what they look like and whether they say something stupid, and the students, they're afraid of speaking in classes and so on because they're worried about looking stupid. Mm-hmm. I used to find it very difficult doing public speaking because I had all those fears, and still do, but I've learned at least how to speak about inequality.
Yeah.
Because I've done it so often.
Yeah. You have to get rid of those worries if you're going to think of everybody's equal. Then, you truly got to walk the walk. Yeah. Well, it's too bad that we have let the inequality get so wide in that way to where it almost seems like the people that are on the other end of the spectrum aren't even the same creature as you, that they're somehow some other kind of animal. And that really starts making us feel like, what are the reasons for all this,
Well, I think what inequality in terms of income and wealth, the material differences between us, is they decide whether we're living in a society which is a very steep social hierarchy like that, or a much shallower one. The material differences create the social distances between us. Sorry, I can't remember the question you just asked me.
Well, this was the last one about happiness, but I'll ask you another one about crime and violence, because you also talked a lot about the correlation between inequality and that. What is the correlation between social and welfare programs and a lower crime rate?
Well, I don't know about social welfare programs, but certainly in more unequal societies have much more violence. You can usually get homicide data that's comparable between countries, and you find them much, much higher in more unequal countries. It's one of the best studied relationships with inequality. And of course, why violence is higher in more unequal countries is because it's triggered by feeling looked down on, loss of face, humiliation, disrespected. And, if you say something that I feel is disrespecting me, there's one way I can make you respect me. It's for people who've got some status and education, it's easier to show status in some other way. But if you haven't, then you do it that way. And as I said earlier, it's because status and class and so on are more important in more unequal societies. You're more watchful about whether somebody's putting you down and disrespecting you. You take offense more quickly because it matters more.
So, and would you say that this also happens in academia, where you have extremely smart people who need to assert their dominance over each other by being the smartest or reciting the most Shakespeare or something like this?
Yes, I think so. And I don't think it's quite as naked as it is in some places, but I think quite a few people go into academic life and do PhDs and so on because of insecurities about their own intelligence and so on. And, if I've got a PhD, then maybe other people know that, I'm not so stupid. I do think I've obviously had I've known a lot of PhD students quite well, and I think those insecurities are my important reasons for doing PhDs and for going into academic life. I'm now a professor. I find it. I was astonished that I was ever made professor. We all have these. What's it called where you don't feel you're really or whatever it is?
You don't feel you're what?
Well, if you're, I don't know, a solicitor or the CEO or something, and you don't really feel inside that you are that person.
Oh, sure. It's like a dysphoria.
Yeah, but there's another name for it anyway. We've all felt those things, and
they say I'm a banker by day, but really what I want to do is dance.
Or you realize that people think it's a high status position, and you've never felt high status genuinely.
So we all have our ability to look at our weaknesses at least, and then try to make up for you. The weak guy always tries to get real strong, and the not so bright guy or The insecurities are the first step in you realizing that maybe you need to make improvements. So,
yeah, and of course, we have this sensitivity to status because in our evolution, it's been incredibly important. I mean, in a monkey dominance hierarchy, it's the strong dominant monkeys at the top who eat first, and the dominant males try and monopolize access to the females. The survival rates for the young of the females is higher if the females are higher in the social hierarchy, because they get better treated, and they don't get bitten so often as the subordinates. They get looking at the food before the dominants have eaten it all. All that kind of thing makes status very important. It makes us, and so, you are very offended if I think you're a failure, stupid, I don't know, any of those, treat you as inferior.
I am a failure. How did you know? Yeah.
We treat each other as equals, and between friends we do. And if one of your friends starts behaving as if he thinks he's better than you, you say, "Who the hell do you think you are?" And that happens very widely.
Yeah, this is my experience, and this is why I've been so keen on sociology and psychology, and because I had to survive not having any other kind of survival skills, was to be able to understand people and know if I'm in danger, and then, but then, observing the ego being one of the most annoying things to have a conversation with.
Yes. Yeah. But I think what we have to remember is that those things become less important where the dominance hierarchy isn't so extreme, where we're nearer to being each other's equals in material terms, we're less bothered by their status issues.
But a certain amount of hierarchies have to exist, but I would say between adult people that don't know each other, I want to do away with hierarchies, but there has to be hierarchies within parental units, yeah?
You mean parents and their children?
Right. I
think that children who are treated more as if they were equal human beings. I mean, you've still got to tell them what they can and can't do, and tell them that that's dangerous and watch out before doing this or that. But I think if they're given the reasons for things, the children I know who I think have come out best are ones who have been treated in that sort of way and not had, I don't know, not been dominated all the time.
I think you're probably right, because also they say the same thing about baby talk. It's not, you shouldn't baby talk your baby, because you should just talk to the baby like a person.
Yeah,
and because that information will get through. Well, it's interesting. So, last question, and this is pretty important, I think. Nobody's really wanting to talk about inequality. They say it on the news and stuff, but they don't really cover it. What was your academic journey? What led you to covering this specific topic? How long back does it go?
Well, there's quite a long history to it. I wanted to work in health. I wanted to work in an organization that I thought was ostensibly worthwhile, and I, at one stage, thought that would be hospital management. And I thought that what's wrong with our National Health Service is that it's a great big bureaucracy, and it needs more democratic input to decide priorities and so on. But I thought if I'm going to be messing about and disagreeing with people in my job, I should be well trained. So I trained in epidemiology, looking at health in populations, and became aware of the huge social class differences in life expectancy. In Britain, if you compare the top and bottom 10 or 20%, you find the people at the top live perhaps 10 years longer than the people at the bottom. There's a way people often have it shown to them is looking at the London underground lines and say that each stop you travel eastwards, there's a year less life expectancy. Because conditions get poorer. The West London is richer than East London still. And actually, one of the big surprises during the decades of research that's been done on these health inequalities is realizing that status itself was important. We used to classify death rates by occupation or whether people owned their own houses or not, just simple variables like that, putting people in occupational class classification. And we thought that the real causes of the differences in death rates were the different material conditions people lived in. So, maybe health's bad because they're in bad housing or they're doing dangerous jobs or there's air pollution. And although all those things matter, we didn't realize that status itself was important, and we only became really aware of that when linking up with people who study monkey hierarchies. People, for instance, looking at macaque monkeys in groups where they'd keep them all in the same compounds, feed them all the same food, so they were getting exactly the same material conditions, and they could experimentally move animals between groups. So, your status might be whatever it is in this group, but move you to a different group and you might end up higher status or maybe lower. But anyway, under those conditions where you manipulate social status and keep animals in the same material conditions, you find that this position in the rank hierarchy has very similar physiological effects to what it does in human beings. So there was a long period where there were endless jokes about the similarity between the hierarchy amongst civil servants that were studied, and there were studies following through 15 or 1,000 or so civil servants and the dominance hierarchy amongst monkeys. So, the top brass would be endlessly compared with silverbacks because there were these similarities in stress hormones and things like that. And we realized gradually that chronic stress makes you more vulnerable to a whole range of diseases. It looks almost like more rapid aging. If you're endlessly stressed, you age faster and become more vulnerable to all the diseases of old age earlier than you would otherwise.
Okay, interesting. Wow.
Stress affects your immunity, your cardiovascular system, your how your brain functions, all sorts of things.
Wow. Yeah, and I can just tell from experience that the even wealthier people aren't even that community oriented, while poor people who happen to be, because there are so little class differences. that there's no reason to have any kind of ego or about status with poor people. And so poor people will just hang out with each other, and the neighbors are more likely in a poor neighborhood to know each other and talk to each other. While in a suburb or something like this, you would have people, they don't know their neighbors. And I find that so fascinating.
Yes, I think it's not always true. And
sure.
Some estates, I think poor estates, the relations are awful, and people are isolated. They try and comfort themselves with drugs and so on, and they have high levels of violence. And I think in some societies you get good social cohesion amongst the poor, but not always.
Not always, yeah.
No.
Well, all I can do is hope for a time when we can all kind of hit the reset button and maybe act in this equal way again, because I also understand the benefits.
Yeah, but the only way we're going to do that is not by all trying to behave differently, but actually by having policies that raise taxes on top incomes, having stronger trade union movement, things that actually improvements in the minimum wage, living wage, and so on. You've got to make those. We can't just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and say, I'm going to be nice to people whether they're richer or poorer than me.
Yeah.
We have to reduce the differences. We can't do it just on the basis of I must try harder kind of thing.
Should we put a cap on how much money one of these monkeys can make?
I don't think it matters much whether you have a cap or whether you tax it very heavily. In Britain and America in the 1960s and 70s, top tax rates were up at 80 or 90%. They've halved since then. And although the rich pretend that it would lead to slower economic growth and all that kind of thing, actually we had faster economic growth then. But, of course, with the climate crisis, nobody should be too sure we need economic growth.
Nope.
As the environmentalists say, we should be growing well-being, not the economy.
We need to change the dirty E word of economics to the nice E word of environment.
Yeah. I'm actually on record as saying that economics is a mental illness.
I like you.
Oh, beware.
Yeah, this is going to be our next hurdle. And right now, the monster of business interests are so large and unstoppable. We're really going to have to pull together and make this happen.
Yeah, the power of big corporations is so anti-democratic in so many ways. The money in politics and the way they run rings around elected politicians. It's crazy.
Bought and sold before they even get into office. They are bought and sold. Yeah, it's incredible, yes. And people need to check that out. Also, the constant threat of being misled and misinformed through various forms of emotionally driven propaganda.
Yeah,
this is one of the things I'm constantly concerned about at the moment, especially. So,
right.
Well,
yes, I hate advertising. In epidemiology, people have found that if you live near green spaces, parks, and so on, you tend to be healthier. And I sometimes wonder if it's because we're away from, being marketed at all the time, and which endlessly emphasizes issues of superiority and inferiority. And they try and sell to you because you look better if you have this or that.
Right.
And all those issues of social comparison. If you're in nature, You're free of that. You can relax. Ah, Christ.
This is why I live in a cabin in the woods, so there's no other way for me. Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah. I live as far away from everybody as I can. I live in Germany, where there's no official middle of nowhere, but I live at the end of the street in a very small town. So,
well, prepare to live till you're 100.
I hope. No, I wouldn't want it to last that long.
Now.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I'm not impressed at this point with the whole outlook. So we'll see. If the Lord takes me tomorrow, okay, I'll be ready whenever. I've got my gin and tonic here. I take it day by day.
That comes next for me. I've only just finished my tea.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to let you go right now. We'll talk after, but thank you for coming on. Richard Wilkinson, awesome human being. Very wise. Thanks.
Thank you.